am a freelance curator based in New York, and I've worked at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis and at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago. And in 2003, I was the assistant curator for the Venice Biennale. To my right is Nicolaus Schafhausen. He's the director of the Witte in Rotterdam. And prior to that, he was the director of the Frankfurt and Kunstverein. He's also the curator of the German Pavilion this year with the British artist Liam Gillick. And he was also the curator of the last German Pavilion in Venice Biennale with Isa Genskin. In the middle is Valie Export, whose work and life spans 40 decades in performance art and film and video. She lives in Vienna. She's also the curator of this year's Austrian Pavilion. And lastly is Tirdad Zolghadr. He's based in Berlin. He is the curator of the United Arab Emirates Pavilion, the first of its kind in the Venice Biennale this year. He was also the co-curator of the 2005 Sharjah Sharjah International. He's also a critic and writer and filmmaker. So welcome, thank you so much, everyone. So the topic today is the biennials and nationalities. And I actually wanted to start with Nicolaus because Nicolaus has a very interesting choice for this year's pavilion. And it's not the first time that the German Pavilion has picked a non-German artist. I think it was in 1993.
No, first was in 1930.
30, okay.
Yeah, with Paul Klee.
Paul Klee. And then the next was Namjoon Paik.
Namjoon Paik in 1993. Namjoon Paik together with Hans Hacke.
Hans Hacke. And they won the Golden Lion that year as well.
Yes, they won the Golden Lion.
And that was also the year, the first time, that I think the Austrian Pavilion, and the curator was Peter Weibel. And he chose 3 artists, one of which was an Austrian artist, Gerald Rockenschab, and Christian Philipp Mueller, as well as Andrea Fraser, who's an American artist from Montana.
Hello.
So perhaps Nicolaus would like to share with us his thoughts on why he chose Liam this year, as opposed to...
Now, yeah, as a curator for the German Pavilion, you get just nominated by the German Foreign Ministry, and as a curator, that's different in other nations, other countries, and as a curator, you're free to do whatever you want to do. Yeah, it's not as a curator, you get chosen, and then you're free, whatever that means. So, it's
first the curator, not the project.
No, not the project at all, not the artist. Not you are okay. There is always a limited autonomy. Yeah, you can't just turn the building down. Or, but when it comes to, actually, this is really.
It's okay.
Yeah, curating, you are free, and you are curatorial choice. I have prepared a very small, quick statement. So, sorry. My invitation to Liam Gillick confirms the image of Germany as a lively and central location for international arts production, and also as a center of critical and discursive debate on contemporary art, architecture, and representation in national contexts. Since the 1970s, participating artists have seen the political iconography of the German pavilion's architecture in Venice as a great challenge, and their artworks have frequently referred to this building's historical contexts in a great variety of ways. 100 years after the German Pavilion was built, Liam Gillick offers a critical exploration of its architecture and a possible other modernity. His outside perspective asks questions about the effect of architecture on people. My invitation to Liam Gillick, or more general, national pavilions, are always affirmative, both by rejecting or accepting the idea of a very national pavilion. As a curator, you are affirming as a premise for the curatorial, which is not unproblematic. To my opinion, artists are never representing a nation, only themselves, their work as part of a discursive network. this explains a little bit why I chose an artist who's neither a German resident or having a German passport.
Great. So perhaps I should ask Tirdad next. Then I want to sort of read a quote that I found that he recently made, which states, "By and large, art professionals around the world dismiss the notion that a pavilion can truly represent a nation. There still remains much to consider. Your citizenship can still largely determine your career and the way art is produced, circulated, and received." Can you perhaps expand on that, and as opposed to what Nicolaus just shared, and share with us your thoughts on the pavilion that you chose?
Absolutely. I was similarly, had similarly mixed feelings to the national project tucked away within the pavilions as Nicolaus. I opted for an approach that was a little more tactically naive, maybe. It was simply trying to foreground exactly the contradiction that you quoted. That is, on the one hand, we all tend to, when we're in Venice, we tend to snicker over Bellini's at these national pavilions, and we find them slightly embarrassing because we consider ourselves terribly cosmopolitan. And at the same time, especially if you're from the UAE, but a host of other countries, you're very aware of how the national background does carry you or does not carry you, etc. And so the idea was, instead of sidestepping the issue gracefully and just doing a well-installed show, to bring this tension to the forefront. And so we played with the World Fair concept. The historical kickoff point for the Venice Biennial was the World Fair in the late 19th century. That was the dominant mode of exhibition. So in various ways, if I have time, I can tell you later how we played on that, how architecturally, artistically, and so forth.
And you chose, this year was one artist that you, Lamia Gargash.
That's right.
She's from Dubai.
That's right.
And then another section, you had 4 representatives from different regions and different generations, or how did that go about? How did you choose those?
That's right. There was the featured artist, Lamia Gargash, who did a new series of photographs. She took pictures of 1-star hotels in the country. There was a so-called kiosk element where there were conversations between various protagonists who helped build up the cultural panorama of the UAE. And then a third element, which equally was quite world fair, was the so-called showcase, which had info on text panels, a computer database, these huge shock and awe type models of museum infrastructure, and work by 4 artists, not new work, older work.
And the architecture was done by?
The architecture, these were models of, for example, of Saadiyat Island, which is a shockingly ambitious project just outside Abu Dhabi, where Jean Nouvel, Zaha Hadid, Frank Gehry, and others are all collaborating on building this cultural district of unprecedented dimensions.
Great.
Should I go on, or would you like to?
Maybe we can come back
Sure.
to that, and just to say hello to Valie and to hear her thoughts on why she chose her artists. And there were several Austrian artists in the pavilion representing Austria this year.
We have the same, I guess I should start, we have the same maybe as you have in Germany. The government or the minister choose us, yeah, and choose the commissioner or the curator. We say commissioner, and then we have free hand. In any case, we have free hand. And I was chosen, and I invited Sylvia Albenmeyer to do the job together. And why we had some discussion if we maybe involve another country in the Austrian Pavilion, but then we said maybe we should want to invite Austrian artists who can deal with the pavilion themselves. So they use the pavilion as a kind of platform for her own expression. For example, we had Elke Christoffel, Dorit Margreiter, and Lois and Franziska Weinberger. Elke Christoffel she's a painter, a video maker. She makes installation. She has a multimedia artwork. Dorit Margreiter works mostly with architecture. In that way, this year she also used the architecture of the Austrian Pavilion. And Lois and Franziska Weinberger mostly work in outside spaces. So we chose them there because they use the outside space in the left side of the pavilion. And this was very important for us to have an object, as a real object made out of wood as an architecture besides the architecture of the pavilion. So extended and expanded the pavilion to the canal, to the water street, one can say, to the urban space. So this was the reason why we chose both. And also in this small pavilion themselves was a sculpture, a very tremendous big sculpture made from plants, and these plants are coming from the Giardini. So you have a connection with the Giardini themselves because the plants are coming from the Giardini. And Elke Christoffel changed the nationality of the Austrian Pavilion. Instead of Austria, the word of the national response to this pavilion, she changed this for taboo. And this is a kind of very important word also for Austria themselves, for the whole political situation and history we have in Austria. So that this pavilion doesn't have any name. The name was taboo. So this means Austria maybe it's a country with taboos, or the pavilion themselves is a taboo. And Dorit Margreiter made a film. She used the empty pavilion before, and she produced the film. They made a film from the pavilion, and this was shown in the pavilion. So this means a kind of tautology. You saw the pavilion, but it was shown in the pavilion. And all three works, of these three artist groups, or these three artists and one group has to do with the pavilion. And the artwork exists in the pavilion time, in the time of the Viennese Biennale, because Dorit Margreiter can show the film everywhere, for sure, but it's never the pavilion. And now it's shown in the pavilion, And Elke Christoffel, if she changes the taboo, it's not the Austrian Pavilion. And the pavilion besides, the small pavilions besides from the Weinbergers, is the pavilion, and the sculpture inside from the plants live so long as the Biennale time is.
So I think it's interesting how all three of you have sort of mentioned why you chose the certain artists in terms of institutional critique with regard to the pavilion itself and the architecture of the pavilion. And I know that with Liam, it's very much part of his work in general. So I wanted to know if the difference between maybe working with someone like Isa and working someone with Liam, how that proved to you perhaps as a different model in terms of the German pavilion itself, or is that something that...
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I got, as a German curator or commissioner, we have the same, like in Austria, you get nominated always for 2 times. It's
in a row?
In a row. I don't see them as an entity, or as a group show. But for me, I never could. It would be also possible, theoretically, curating a thematical group show in the pavilion, or showing 2
like
or 3.
Part 1, part 2, or...
Part 1, part 2. Quite often, 2 or 3 artists exhibited at in the German pavilion. For me, it was crucial to focus on only on one artist. I had the feeling, especially in the German pavilions, that always one lost. If you show more than 2. It's such a centralized building. But after working with Isa Gensken, no, it's also
Tino. And Tino? Was Tino involved?
No, it
Tino
was not. Tino, for example, Tino Segal in together with Thomas Scheibitz in 2005. I don't want to argue against Thomas Scheibitz, but the people forgot about Thomas Scheibitz.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
And
He
it's,
overshadowed.
Timo Seeger completely overshadowed the other. After working with the expectation from the commissioners, from the foreign ministry, after I showed Isa Gensken, they came back to me, oh, we expected something completely different from you. You are a relatively young curator. Why haven't you chosen a bunch of very young artists, hip artists, representing Germany on a more, that hip Berlin area? That's for me. That is not the format, just presenting young and upcoming artists.
So for you, it's important to do a solo project.
Solo projects, putting an individual artist who had already a career center stage.
Okay.
An open discourse, which has a lot to do with the discursive media network. Lots of quality newspapers and other media in Germany. It's a very diverse system. How it's not only about the artist practice, it's also how to create a discourse in the nation itself.
Within the biennial or within the...
In the nation itself, in the biennial. After the opening days, the whole Giardini, they get a huge group show. You know, the normal visitor is not interested itself anymore in a particular national pavilion. They see it as a total, as a group show. Somehow the national pavilions disappear.
They did.
They
the
do.
Nationalities sort of...
And the nationalities disappear as
rationale.
well.
And Tirdad, you chose a young artist, a young photographer, and why is that? And as opposed to maybe a group show for the first time, or?
It was not only because she's hip. I was interested in working with one artist because if you have this kind of buffet of artists, there is always the chance that people misunderstand it as representing a country in a much more literal way.
But you're not carrying the whole history of 100 pavilions or 60 pavilions which got created before you.
No, absolutely. No. I agree. I'm saying that working with one artist makes more sense in this kind of context. Absolutely. I mean, whether you have this heritage to deal with or whether you're the newcomer, the post-colonial hot potato of the year, as we were saying earlier, I think that doesn't change much. I think that if you have one artist, then the curatorial choice and the arbitrariness of this choice to a certain extent is in the foreground, which is a good thing, as opposed to a kind of reflection of little bits and pieces of specimens of the artistic panorama.
But people
of the
still
country.
put a lot of weight in one artist representing a nation or a pavilion.
You can't escape that completely. I mean, that's you do damage control.
So should
should
age and gender be also a factor?
Definitely not.
Yes, of course.
Or should not be?
Not.
I mean, what was important for me in the United Arab Emirates was finding an artist with whom I shared a wavelength that would carry through a new project.
She's young.
And she's very young. And so that seemed like a really challenging, interesting possibility for me, as opposed to choosing a certain, range of generations, and which would kind of make me less of a nuisance to the UAE art scene than I am now. But I think it worked out the way it did.
And we had Catherine David on another, she spoke by herself on Adash in the pavilion there, and she was saying many people confuse Adash and the UAE pavilion, and she sort of tried to explain the differences between the two, but somebody told me that there were 15 sort of pavilions or exhibitions around the Middle East area, and 21 including satellite projects that were solo or group exhibitions or guerrilla shows, exactly. So I wanted your thoughts on that and how the region, the Gulf region is expanding, and how you'll do it next time differently or the same, or what you foresee in the future in that region, because it's very interesting.
I mean, it's a simple question, and at the same time, it's a very tricky question because I'm always very wary of curators who become the ambassadors or the experts for a given set of countries, and without naming any names myself, there are some curators who are much more comfortable in that role than I am, who become the the spokespersons that you turn to ask. And I find it very difficult to keep focusing the attention on curatorially specific questions when it comes to certain countries. Between Tehran, the UAE, and Cairo, it's very, very different things going on. As far as the UAE is concerned, it's pretty much at a crossroads right now. I'm not as pessimistic as many others are with respect to this gargantuan effort being invested in huge monumental infrastructures. I think it can go wrong. It can go terribly wrong. That's possible. But from the little I have seen in collaboration and discussion with the actors and the decision makers involved, I think there is a potential. People are open to trying not to repeat mistakes or making mistakes that people are expecting them to. I think it might turn into something unexpectedly promising.
Who is financing the pavilion, your pavilion?
The pavilion was the Ministry of Culture.
What is the interest of the Ministry of Culture participating in a very Eurocentric system like the Venice Biennale still remains?
I mean, a Eurocentric system. I mean, I'm not sure it's that Eurocentric anymore, really.
Hopefully not, but it is. If you have not a building in the Giardini, for example, a own building. Well, Giardini has the most. I just want to provoke a little bit. Yeah, still the most visitors, most visible.
I mean, put it this way: the interest of the Ministry of Culture is very clear. It's has the same agenda as most ministries across the world. They want to put the country on the map. Okay. They want prestige, cultural capital, all these good things. You can't argue with that. The Eurocentric question is not quite. You can't quite map it onto each other because, for example, a scene like Istanbul has really managed to reinscribe the standard version of contemporary art that we refer to in the biennial sense of the term, in ways that are neither particularly Turkish or particularly European. And I think the UAE is at a crossroads right now. It's too early to tell what it's going to
So it's
make
still
of the
forming
situation.
and still...
I would say it's quite early still.
Valie, do you have any thoughts on...
For me, as an artist and also a curator, sometimes I also curate shows or film shows or events, symposiums, etc. But for me, as an artist, was very important to show different scenes and different images from the Austrian scene, and this, I mean, the international scene. And by different, I mean because in the last, I guess it was the last 4 times, it was always a solo show, and it was always a painter or a sculptor, and it was always a male artist. And so I thought now it needs time, and we now really should start and to show our female artists we have internationally integrated in the art scene, and we show this in different medias, like painting, like film or video and sculpture. And this was very important for me to find out a kind of dialogue with international media scene. And as you said, for example, the Biennale is for me a kind of really open system. It's open. If you see all the nationalities, then you can have a really kind of dialogue or discourse, with other nationalities. And very interesting for me is also the Biennale, because my first time was 62. In 1962, I was my first time at the Biennale as a visitor, and I have seen it very often. And it is very interesting how the pavilion changes in his own structure, political or media or whatever, and so jumping from sculpture to installation or to whatever, and so, and this is also very interesting.
I'm sure
for
it's
me.
also changed since you showed there in 1980
Yes, a lot of change.
as an artist in the pavilion yourself.
Yeah, but the funny thing is, if you stand in front from the Austrian Pavilion, you have on that side painting, and on the left side you have media. In the same time, 1980, it was Maria Lasnik as a painter on the right side, and me as a media artist on the left side. So it was funny to find the structure again. And one has also to say, for example, Hans Holland was the commissioner, and Werner Hoffmann. It was really a kind of pioneer work, yeah, what he did, to show two female artists. This was really the first time in the Biennale in Venice.
Well, it seems like all three of you have very different points of views in terms of your own pavilions. It's sort of a solo show discussing more of a discourse of an artist's work and larger topic, and then you more international scene, and Tirdad, a completely different forming region. So maybe we can open up for questions if you want.
I
Yes,
have one more
please.
topic actually. I followed I'm working not in Germany, and I followed in the last 10 days media reception in about 5 different countries. What surprised me most was that the media, as a daily media, mainly focusing on their own artists. It's always talking on their own pavilions. They don't see the international variety. And especially in the German media, it doesn't. They spoke about the 10 same pavilions.
How was the
hardly.
German reception of?
Extremely bad, and but the what means bad? As we thought we expected somehow that that there will be the German media, the daily media, they are built on a. There are lots of high-quality newspapers. They are built of discursive structures and strategies. You always have to see what comes next in a couple of weeks or in a couple of months. And the reception of the...
It's like the Italian newspapers.
Yeah, like lots of the Italian newspapers or French newspapers.
Yeah.
For us it was very interesting that the German contribution got widely positively discussed in other countries. And the same happened in England, for example, with the with the Steve McQueen pavilion. It got very positively received for example, in the Netherlands, in Belgium, and in France, and not in England itself. And that's a very interesting phenomenon, you know, and also that they are not. Most of it costs also a lot of time to see all the 77 pavilions for the media and for all the journalists. But it's interesting that they focus, especially the European newspapers. I can't tell about the daily newspapers in other parts of the world, focusing, in a Eurocentric way on their own participants.
For the Yui Pavilion, that's an official entry, correct? So will it be always in the Arsenale, or could it be somewhere else?
That depends on the grace of the Biennale itself. I don't think so. I think that space is meant to host different national pavilions. It was Africa the last time around.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
This was a strategy from the Biennale.
They invited us.
They invited them.
Okay. Yeah. So, and Africa, not anymore. They disappeared. No. What?
I can't see.
Poland?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the audience, perhaps? Questions? No? Yeah?
There's
I'd just be interested to know other works or other pavilions you each saw within the Biennale that you thought specifically related to or had interesting dialogues with pavilions you yourselves curated? Were there other pieces you saw which sort of changed your own? I mean, obviously you don't know what everyone else is doing beforehand, but after, I don't know.
I think it's different to all of us. I'm running an institution, and I think I have worked with about 40 different artists who are now in the Giardini or in the main Biennale, and there are networks in between, curatorially, but also the artists know each other, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But it's different to all of us. We are working in different fields. But
I could just give a general, I mean, apart from the pavilions which are represented on this panel, I was drawn to those which tried to grapple with the biennial situation rather than naturalize it. I'm impatient to see people confront the format, this very ambitious piling up of heaps of art, just using the space and the budget as economically as possible, you know, so maybe other examples. I mean, nothing, you know, I'm not expecting anything overwhelming, but something like I was very happy to see Roman Ondak's contribution. I was happy to see Elm Green and Dragset. Gestures such as these.
Okay, yes. The same for me as
yes, I think
as
I agree. That's interesting. We agree probably on the same pavilions, you know, the same artists.
Mm-hmm.
But what I also found this time interesting, the audience, which I saw or guided through our pavilions so far, they have, in the times of an economical crisis, which is not only an economical crisis, it's probably also a crisis of what explains the world best or in a very direct way. For me, it was not very surprising that the Nordic Pavilion was the most successful and accessible pavilion for larger audiences.
Why was it not surprising for you?
They're producing, curatorially, but also the artists producing lots of pictures, which you can identify with or not, but you understand it easily. I'm not judging, but it's not theoretical.
They also started from the outside of the pavilion as well, so they were drawing a lot of people in with the piece.
Yeah, but it's already, the building is built in the 1960s. It's a very democratic architecture, open to the public. But this was completely different 2 years ago, when I curated the German pavilion with Isa Genske.
Yes.
It was a much more abstract time.
Yes.
Also, the expectation from the audience changed. I think in time, you know, in such a short period. I'm interested, and we discussed it already earlier today, how it's not how the market is going to change because of the economic crisis. It's more about how will the art production going to change as an effect of the economical and financial crisis. And then how are the expectations of the visitors, of the audience, of the media is going to change.
I think it's up to the artists then.
Yeah, it's up to the artists. The power is up to the
ultimately,
artists.
yes.
Maybe the idea of utopia is coming back again.
Yes.
A new one, whatever. It's a kind of point to find out something about what does it mean now in these days, utopia. And this is also very interesting for art production, but also for the society.
Or the means of economy, using different means of economy, for sure. Do we have any other questions?
Since we're talking, Nicolaus mentioned the African Pavilion. For another Biennale, would you think it makes sense to stipulate again to have one continent represent, one pavilion represent a whole continent, or would you have it rather make it more sense have individual African countries who want to make a pavilion have a pavilion in Giardini or outside in the city?
Honestly, I found it the last time, I found it a little bit perverse that a whole continent got represented as one country. it would be the same if Europe would be, you know, and Europe is built up on diversity. If we go to the Dakar Biennale or to South Africa, if there would be a European,
it would be a scandal.
I found that scandalous in a way the last time. I don't think it's a very appropriate format for a Biennale, which claims to be a world show. I think that's perverse.
And that's probably also why they went for a small country.
That is only why I call it still a Eurocentric model. If we look into the other regions of the world, call it, okay, there's Asia, there's Africa, there's the Middle East. Oh, very dangerous.
That's true, although I would add that very often these otherizations are cases of self-otherizations. It's very often the practitioners within those spaces that very readily buy into this kind of self-exoticization that occurs.
Yeah, I agree. But again, to the I think 95% of the visitors after the opening days are Europeans. There.
What do you think about that in terms of expanding your audience, or is that something that you think about?
Expanding the audience in the UAE? Well, I mean, for that, the pavilion is quite helpful. Generating interest and curiosity in the contemporary arts. I mean, a pavilion is a good way to start.
Which is why you have it in somewhere like Venice, in the Biennale of Venice.
Okay. Maybe Dubai should found a new Biennale.
Abu Dhabi is working on it.
Okay, Abu Dhabi. Good.
Did you have a question?
I do. Other than your own, which pavilion do you think best captures the feeling or the concept behind the Venice Biennale?
It's a very tricky question.
The international
You would
pavilion.
first have to define the concept of the Venice Biennale. Do you mean Daniel Birnbaum's concept for this year, or the World Fair?
Just the World Fair with nationality and representation from different countries with the artists.
Or lack of.
I think we did.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting the three of us, we could easily agree on our top 10, and we probably would have more or less the same top 10. And it's not about I think we are all looking to a very discursive model of representation. And there were some, but not all of them. There were lots of pavilions, and I don't want to build up an A and a B list, who would just work on representation itself. And I think this is the wrong model. Representing the culture of a specific nation.
Great. I think we've run out of time, unfortunately. So thank you all for joining us, and please feel free to ask any questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you.